燃えたよ。燃え尽きた。真っ白にな。
Joe Yabuki, a boxer in anime and manga known as a legend to everyone who knows him and a really amazing character. Ashita no Joe is a classic for giving us the character known as Joe Yabuki, and the way he had driven the story gave us one of the greatest experiences when going into anime and manga. I want to talk about the life and tragedy of this amazing character, and even though I'm saying it's a tragedy, it's a beautiful one that leads Joe to satisfaction in the very end. Joe is a tragic hero in my eyes, a great or virtuous character in a dramatic tragedy who is destined for downfall, suffering or defeat. I think this definition fits well for Joe Yabuki, so you could use it when referring to what exactly his role fits into as a protagonist. His story is one that I see that is levels above many because of its perfectly crafted structure that leads all points of the story to a really great conclusion. The build-up of this tragedy spans from Rikiishi's death to the end, but for now, at the start of the video, let's talk about Joe's life before he had met Rikiishi and didn't have that passion for boxing. Joe's life up until he met Tange Danpei was a void. Nothing had occurred other than him running away from orphanages and being a menace to a lot of people. He had no passion, goal or anything in mind to do in life. He was a wanderer with no place to go. Every time he walked through different places, he had no objective other than to find a place and survive his isolated nights. If he is stopped from doing this action, he would result in violence as he doesn't like having people above him. He has run away from orphanages for that exact reason. He hates the thoughts of someone holding him captive, so he cherishes his freedom. The freedom that he would only defend with his skill. A vagabond whose only talent was in his fist that could only hold a big amount of potential. A potential so big that would eventually lead him to fight the world champion. But in the moments of his aimless wanderings, he had no sort of opportunity to use his fist in. So he continued along and eventually ran into the Doya slums, which led him to meet the known drunk Tange Danpei and a group of loose kids. His run-in with these people made fate turn its wheels, and he would finally gain that opportunity that he had never had or thought of getting, an opportunity that would help him gain an objective. Meeting Tange Danpei, Joe was pretty annoyed with having an old drunk run around him, begging him for him to become a boxer. He cherishes his freedom, so he refused multiple times, but eventually gave in as he had gotten tired over his nagging. But he would be able to acquire some bits of money and of course a roof over his head. Even though it was shabby, it was at least something that had finally supported him instead of towering walls that locked him away from freedom. He began to practice boxing with Danpei, once again showing off his great potential. When practicing, Joe would learn of something that he could strive for, being the tomorrow Danpei had seen when observing Joe. He could strive for tomorrow where he could gain success through his skills or be left in the meaningless void he was in before. He chose to stay for now and think about his next actions, but later down the line, he would get in trouble, displaying his teenage rebellious side with him conning people for money and eventually being sent to a juvenile prison. This had shown that Joe hadn't really changed yet when getting into boxing and working with Danpei. His training would be fruitless for now, but he would eventually start to see the light in Danpei's tomorrow. So little by little, Joe started to work on the different moves Danpei had sent him through envelopes. This would be the start of Joe wanting to strive for something else, and the next thing he would strive for would only come later. So Joe gets sent to another juvenile prison for causing trouble at his old one, but this new one, will be the one where Joe first erupts in life. An eruption that shows his first flame that gives him an idea on what to do now on. The way this thing starts is by him running into the man named Rikiishi Toru when trying to escape. He would only be beaten up by him, terrifyingly, but Joe sees a light through that defeat, and that light would be only to beat Rikiishi. Boxing matches begin to occur in the prison, which would give Joe a chance to get back at Rikiishi for his loss before, and when he would try to make his way to his newfound goal, he would cross through other challenges that actually improve his boxing abilities even more, showing his potential isn't useless. The time finally comes where the two rivals are put against each other, and Joe shows a surprising performance with him able to keep getting up even though Rikiishi, the man known as able to punch down cows, knocks him down multiple times. Joe's will burns strongly when aiming for a goal, and this match proves it. He won't go down until he meets success and satisfaction. He had never gotten a goal like this and he's not gonna waste it, so he keeps on getting up. The match later finishes with the two of them getting knocked out in the end. Joe's rivalry with Rikiishi doesn't meet a dead end at that point of time, thankfully, so we start to see the two of them grow stronger alongside each other until Rikiishi leaves the prison and is sent to the real boxing world where Joe will slowly but patiently follow on behind, for another match against his rival and his friend. Joe's arrival in the boxing world months later would only let him show off great feats. He has a stunning debut which makes everyone slowly start to remember the name Joe Yabuki. He successfully instigates Wolf and his manager into letting him into the game, and they hold a fight against each other. Joe shows his resilience in this fight once again as he enables a triple cross counter on the verge of defeat against his tough opponent, making him finally get closer to reaching the goal that had always been in mind since he began to love boxing. His joy of boxing would finally be realized in this long-awaited fight, and this fight serves as a halfway point of the story of Ashita no Joe. It's the start of a tragedy and a memory so strong that it would be latched onto Joe for years. Joe vs Rikiishi, undoubtedly the most iconic fight in Ashita no Joe, and one of the most greatest fights in anime and manga history. A fight between longtime friends that respect each other's strengths and weaknesses, and a fight between two strongly determined individuals to complete their goal. Joe wants to beat Rikiishi to satisfy the flame he brought him, and Rikiishi wants to beat Joe as he realizes his strength and that he needs to put him down as he walks his path to become the greatest boxer in the world. When you think about these two goals, of course Rikiishi's one seems like the bigger picture. He wants to beat Joe since he doesn't want to have his own defeat that happened in Juvie to be etched into his mind as he becomes the greatest boxer. He needs to beat him now and get their rivalry over with. To Joe though, it seems way more personal. Their rivalry is something Joe had never had before. It sparked a friendship in Joe's eyes that he would hold dear to himself. He wants to equally clash hands with Rikiishi and tackle the both of their flames in the ring. He wants that picture in his eyes. He doesn't want to become the greatest boxer in the world, but wants to finally be his friend in a fair boxing match and watch their fire glow bright as the sun. This match is amazing, but the conclusion of it serves as great development for Joe's next motives. In round 6 of this amazing fight, Joe was pretty much struggling. Rikiishi has a devastating uppercut that is sharp as ever and is currently winning in this fight. So Joe is as desperate as ever and throws a pretty hard punch at Rikiishi's head in desperation. This punch would hit Rikiishi straight in the temple, serving as a major cause of his death later on after the fight. Rikiishi does eventually win the fight though, and I was fine with his victory. He deserved it. After going through a tormenting weight loss session that rid him of water and food, Rikiishi pushed himself to be able to actually fight Joe. His real fight was in himself. Would he have the will enough to move forward to completing his goal, or would he stop his suffering and drink a simple supply of water? Rikiishi moved on forward and eventually lost his weight and won the fight against himself and Joe. He deserved the victory, and his death would move Joe forward to succeed the legend Rikiishi Toru. After the death of his rival, Joe became a vagabond once again, just like at the beginning of the story. He isolated himself from everyone else and suffered due to losing his friend. The way the aftermath of the fight parallels the start of Ashita no Joe is amazing. His goal gone and his life has become empty again. His flame has died out, but there are no white ashes. There are still embers, but he doesn't light them up again. Instead, he walks the nights alone, with the guilt of killing Rikiishi etched into his mind. He suffers dearly and has no way to deal with it. This is the first time something big like this has happened. Well, there was the time he had broken Wolf's jaw, making him not be able to box ever again, but that wasn't as big as this. Joe's life has now sadly reverted back to his old one. He aimlessly walks the streets by himself while calling back to that one inescapable memory. But eventually he does go back to the Tange gym, going back to the people who had supported him and still do. He goes back there and still trains boxing, showing he still wants to fight and still wants to light that flame back up in the ring. He tries to use fighting to cope, but it doesn't fully heal him. He's not able to punch people in the face anymore in fear of killing them, and he only does body shots now. He starts to get beaten by opponents that he should be able to give a good match against. Joe's reputation falls, and eventually he runs away from the boxing world once again. But this time he uses his strength in underground boxing for broken people who want money and still have some of their strength in them. While participating in this rigged place, a new strong player arrives in the boxing world. Joe had seen him before he set off, but he didn't see his skills. This new guy that Joe's interested in has a knack for acting in the boxing ring, so he's able to get people to fight him. He's too strong, so he doesn't show his full strength until the very end. This person is none other than Carlos Rivera, the guy who will light Joe's embers and make them into a raging fire once again. Carlos is the next Rikiishi for Joe, someone who he wants to overcome more than anything in the boxing world. He wants to call out his acting, call out his secret elbow move, and fight him with the two of them using their full strength against each other, no holding back. This is what he plans to do, and he studies Carlos to do so. After a while, Joe leaves the underground boxing dump to re-enter the boxing world to be able to beat his new big opponent. I think his fight with Carlos is really well done. I love the dynamic between the two of them, and I love how it serves as a rebirth of the legend Joe Yabuki. They both love to fight, and the two couldn't be able to show their love for that at times. Joe couldn't due to grieving, and Carlos couldn't as everyone had feared his strength and no one would get into a ring with him. But getting into the ring with Joe, Carlos was able to feel something. He felt the joy of fighting again, and he would unleash his strength at his opponent in the truest sort of sense. While doing so, Joe would feel the love of fighting as well and finally get over the loss of Rikiishi in the ring. The pure chaos this fight brings out was so good to see. The two fighters felt themselves again and it was amazing. Even though they started going wild and began kicking, elbowing and throwing illegal punches at each other, it felt like a blast to them. To be honest, it felt refreshing to see this after all the tragic incidents that had occurred before. But even after all of this, a tragedy would still occur. I guess that's just the story of this great manga. Carlos would later go up against the world champion Jose Mendoza and suffer a brutal punch that would enable him punch drunk for the rest of his life. Truly an unfortunate outcome for someone who had found himself again. And for Joe, he would mistakenly think that he was the one who had made Carlos punch drunk, which adds to the things that he had broken in his mind. Wolf, Rikiishi, and now Carlos were all affected by Joe in one way or another. So Joe carries the burden of all of their losses and fights on to challenge the world champion himself. Joe goes through many challenges on his way to Jose Mendoza and they all affect him in ways that either support his mindset or skill. But in all of these matches, Joe is slowly becoming punch drunk. It was after Carlos's match that he had started to become punch drunk. He didn't show any full symptoms or suffer from it early on because he had a goal strongly focused on, which was beating the world champion. But as the story progresses on, it gets more and more clear that Joe is punch drunk. He shows slight symptoms here and there, with Yoko, the person Joe hates the most, being the first one to catch on to this and actually worry about Joe's growth. Even when warned, Joe would keep walking on the path to completing his new goal because nothing had stopped him before taking on either Rikiishi or Carlos, so nothing would stop him now that he's carrying the burden of the two of them into his next fight. The last length of Ashita no Joe is probably the most emotional the story had ever been since Rikishi's death. Joe is punch drunk, Carlos is severely punch drunk and has no idea who he was before. Yoko and Danpei watch as Joe fights the world champion while in this broken state, and the last fight happens. This last fight is really the greatest ever since Rikiishi and Carlos's fights. In Joe vs Jose, Joe shows his incredible will that he has to win while really broken. His flame is brighter than ever, even if it's starting to vanish. If this is the last fight for him, he won't make sure there are any embers left but just pure white ash. An ash that symbolizes his satisfaction after burning brightly, an ash that makes sure Joe has a pure ending and not one half finished. An ending so pure, Joe's tragedy won't end in sadness, failure or dissatisfaction, but an end with him having a smile on his face due to him shining in the ring, just like his first fight with Rikiishi in the juvenile prison. Even though this story is a tragedy, it's a beautiful one that shows a legend trying his hardest to work towards his goal, and even if he lost in the end, he's tomorrow's Joe anyway. He would look forward to moving on tomorrow and try once again. The tomorrow Danpei had seen would only finally be realized by Joe in the end, and all that would be left would be pure white ash.